Welcome to the Emotions Coaching Summit 2024, brought to you by In Good Company, a global coaching training company and founder of the revolutionary Emotions Coaching Practitioner Training. If you're inspired today to continue your journey of emotions coaching, then be sure to check out our website at igcompany.co.uk for full details of that course. For now, we invite you to sit back and enjoy the amazing lineup that we have for you today from our expert speakers who are all leaders in their field. Enjoy!
Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining this session this afternoon. I'm so delighted to introduce you to Professor Mesquita, and she's going to be exploring with us the intersection of emotions and culture. So Batja Mesquita is a social psychologist, an affective scientist, and a pioneer of cultural psychology. She's a professor of psychology at the University of Leuven in Belgium, where she's also director of the Centre for Social and Cultural Psychology. Professor Mesquita is one of the world's leading authorities on the psychological study of cultural differences in emotions, and her most recent research focuses on the role of emotions in multicultural societies. Her work has seen her consulting for organisations such as the World Health Organization. And as she's going to be sharing powerful insights from her research on how emotions are influenced and affected by culture. So welcome. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Jo. I want to I'm not a pro in managing my tech, but I'll try.
Slides are here. We can see them on the full screen.
Good. Great. So I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you, Jo and Zoe, to have me here, to invite me to know about my work. And I want to start a story. I will also, like some of the previous people, I will leave about 15 minutes for you to ask me questions, because I'm really interested in the back and forth. But I want to start with a story that shaped my understanding of emotions in multicultural context. I was born and raised in the Netherlands, and the first opportunity for me to work outside of the United States was when I moved to the University of Michigan. I had that doesn't seem to work. I'm sorry. Can I do this? I can't move in my slides.
If you go down at the bottom, on the bottom left-hand corner, sometimes there's arrows as opposed to being able to hit the space button.
And it doesn't do anything.
Oh no.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing and then probably share the not animated slides with you, hoping that will work. I'm sorry, you see my whole camera.
Okay,
This is one of those moments where technology makes our lives so much easier.
And you still, no, you don't see any of this, right?
No, not right now.
Okay. I think the only way I know to do this, it's going to be less nice, but it will still show you what I mean. I don't think my animation comes through in Zoom. So here you are, manual. You'll see what I see. So I went to the University of Michigan, and at that point I was 33. And an interesting detail is that at that point I had been studying culture and emotion for 6 years. And just after arriving, I joined a seminar on emotions organized by a professor for doctoral students. And the first meeting started with a round of, I'm sorry, you don't get any of the animation, but I joined a seminar on emotion, and the first meeting started with a round of introductions in which the doctoral students all introduced themselves and said what important contributions they were going to make to the research on emotion. And mind you, they were just starting, but they sounded very confident. And when it was my turn, I said in a small voice that I was interested in researching culture and emotion, and that I had done a little work in that direction already. And the professor waited until I was done talking, and then he said, you're a world she's a world expert in the field of culture and emotion, about how Joe just introduced me a little less, and then added that I had just published this groundbreaking article. And I really didn't know how to respond to that. And I mumbled, well, expert is a big word. And I looked at the ground in embarrassment. Now, the professor had the kindest intent. He tried to give me the respect as, give me my place as a respectable scholar in the doctoral seminar. And he acknowledged me and praised me in a way that leaders often do in American workplaces. But for me, this created an uncomfortable situation. My generation of Dutch people grew up with the idea that nobody should feel any better than anybody else, and that you should not be pretentious or conspicuous. And actually, my mom said something like, act normal, that's special enough, when I acted up or when I was being conspicuous. I know that sounds to many people not from my generation, sounds almost cruel, but so what I felt in response to the professor was a mix of inhibition, embarrassment, and discomfort. All things that I would not have felt had I not come from the Netherlands, I think. So it was actually the first time that I realized that my emotions connected me with my culture. Given that I had been studying cultural differences in emotions for so many years at that point, it was remarkable that I only saw my emotions for the first time as anything but natural. It shows you, I think, how hard it is to become aware that your emotions are cultured. Understanding this as coaches can make a huge difference in the way that we work with individual clients and teams. Now, you may think that my story is interesting or not interesting, but that it has little to do with emotions, that I merely reacted differently than many coming from an American context would. So to explain this further, let me get clear for a moment what I understand by emotions. So there is a lot of, you've probably heard a lot of different definitions today. I've seen a few of the presentations, not all of them. But even for somebody who has researched emotions for 30 years or more, like I have, it's not that there is a really good definition that we all agree about. What fascinates me about them, and the reason that I keep going deeper and deeper, is the continuous way that the research in emotion keeps uncovering more ways we can relate to each other. And of course, the better we as humans relate to each other, well, we all understand this well enough, the better workplaces, schools, politics, essentially the better world we have. And given this, I'm going to spend the rest of my time today attempting to arm you with enough of this research and examples of the results in practice to hopefully have you leave today with enough insight into this area to help you become an even better coach in this multicultural world. So all of this said about my work in this area, it's challenging to provide a definition. But one thing that many people in this field agree about is that emotions occur when events matter to you. So when they matter to your goals, to your norms, to your preferences. And that the other thing that people agree about is that they motivate you to align the event to your goal. So they harmonize your relationship with your environment, with your interests. Now, let me unpack this with a simple example. Suppose you're hiking and come across a bear. You recognize that this is not good for your interests or your goal in staying alive, right? And so your fear emotion arises. And that emotion motivates you to get away from the bear, motivates you to align the event to your goals, namely to your goal of staying alive in this case. Now, of course, so it motivates you to align your environment or your relationship with the environment in a way that is good for you. That's what an emotion does. It signals something is important, and it motivates you to behave in a way that what is important for you gets preserved or attained. Now, of course, most of our emotions are not about bears in the woods, but they help us navigate our social life. But we can still use the same definition of emotion. So in my American classroom example, I felt embarrassed about attracting too much attention. So what happened there interfered with my goal of being inconspicuous and of not attracting attention. And I tried to escape the attention by downplaying the praise and looking at the floor, however effective I may have been. Now, how one person feels in a situation, and I've heard this before, can be very different from how another person feels in the same situation. And so people do not react or behave in the same way. Why is this? Well, the most important thing is that emotions do something in your relationship. They're not merely subjective feelings. When we can get our heads around the idea that emotions do something in relationship, it's an excellent starting point for understanding cultural differences in emotions. In the workplace, this provides an essential key to better and stronger relationship within our organizations. Going back to my Michigan example, my embarrassment signaled to others that I didn't want to stand out. But in the US, standing out is often desired and culturally valued. You want to show that you're unique and accomplished. So had I been raised closer to Michigan, not in the Netherlands, I might have felt good at the praise of the professor and beamed instead of looking at the ground. Now, I know that all of you as coaches work with diverse teams, also culturally diverse. So whether you were aware of it or not at the time, I'm sure that you have equally experienced cultural differences in the emotions with your clients. And I would like to invite you to take a moment to reflect about some of those occasions. So it may be you have felt uncomfortable, either because a client wasn't responding the way you expected, or because you felt at a loss about how to respond. You shared a compliment and that was met with blushing, for example. Or have you felt that a team member or a manager was unnecessarily rude or aggressive, for example, in response to what you thought was straightforward feedback? Or to the contrary, can you remember a time you didn't understand why your client or somebody else in the team wasn't more assertive? I'm actually really interested in hearing about those examples and experiences. I'm still trying to learn, but I think the format of this talk hardly allows me to, also because I don't see the chat, hardly allows me to ask you about them now, but I think it's good to keep in mind what those little glitches may have been that may have had to do with emotions. And what I hope those experiences teach you is that people react very differently in situations, often because they feel differently. And as coaches, our understanding and responding well to emotional expressions is the key to effective people stewardship. To working with culturally diverse organizations. It's an important part of what many refer to these days as emotional intelligence or sometimes emotional empathy. So we're learning about this today, but as we do so, I'd also invite you to use a slightly different lens than you may be used to. You see, if we want to be good coaches to culturally diverse teams, we need to be aware that our own emotions are not the default. In order to manage relationships, to collaborate effectively, and to deal with conflict, we need to learn to recognize and talk about differences in emotions. And that requires us also to be able to step out of our own experiences. When I told you about me as a Dutch fellow in America, I shared feeling differently than many Americans would. But truthfully, these feelings are not radically different between the Netherlands and the US, because both of these countries are weird cultures: Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So they share some similarities, especially in terms of their Western lenses. But cultural differences can be much bigger than the ones between weird countries. And it's important that we as coaches identify this lens. Now have a look at this map. What you can see is that these cultures are weird in more than one way. They really don't make up the majority of the world. However, think about it for a moment. Much of our knowledge about organizational behavior comes from these weird cultures. And so we interpret things at work through this way of seeing. If we really are to understand the role of emotions at the workplace, we need to broaden our scope and consider how emotions operate in most of the world, all the places that are not weird. Now let's have a deeper look. And I'm starting to tell you about trust and leadership. Let me ask you right away, which of these two men you would trust more? Now, trust is so central to working well together, but it turns out the answer to the question of trust is informed by emotions. And you will surely not be surprised, certainly not in the context of this talk, to hear that emotions that make us seem trustworthy are culturally different. So did you trust the man on the right or on the left more? If you're from a weird culture, that's not true for everybody, but most of you likely judge the person on the left to be more trustworthy and a better leader. But if you ask people in China, most would say that it's the person on the right. Now, the same photos, completely different feelings based entirely on the culture we're from. In one study, researchers downloaded pictures of leaders in the US and China, pictures like these. And these were government officials, CEOs of companies, and university presidents. And they looked at what the expression of these leaders was. And the first finding is that leaders in the United States were 5 times as likely to smile, any kind of smile, than leaders in China. And this was regardless of the kind of organization they worked with. And even if you took the difference in smiling into account, leaders in the United States were more than 6 times as likely to show the excited smiles, the smiles of the person on the left side, than the Chinese leaders. Why would that be? Well, happiness is considered really important in many American contexts, but not to the same extent in many other cultural contexts. And this is especially the case for excited happiness. And here you see a study, unfortunately without the animation, but you see a study where you see the percentage of photos from these leaders that had an excited smile. And you see that the US is all the way on the top and that China is all the way down. And on the x-axis, you see they asked how much students in those cultures, in those countries, ideally would like to feel excitedly happy. So students in the United States would like to feel really excitedly happy. And you can see that this is almost a perfect correlation with the US at the high end and China at the low end. And what you can also see is that all the weird cultures, the cultures in orange at this slide, were on the high side, so had high excited smiles, much higher actually, and they also liked to feel more excitedly happy than the non-weird cultures. South Korea is an exception, you see here. In the same study, they also found, and I'm not going to show you a slide for this, but they also found that calm smiles were highly predicted or highly correlated by how much students ideally like to feel low arousal happiness, things like calm or serene or relaxed or peaceful. Now, of course, this finding raises another question, right? Which is, why do some cultures prefer excited happiness and other cultures prefer calm happiness? And the answer is that each culture prefers the kind of happiness that is best suited to perform the tasks or relationship goals that are valued in that culture. So in cultures like the US, mostly weird cultures, excited happiness is valued because that helps you to achieve control and influence, both over people and also over situations. And that's what is important. Now, in many other cultures like China, calm happiness is important because it's conducive to adjustment. And it's important in those cultures to be flexible and attuned to the needs of others and to the requirements of the situation at hand. So we basically show and feel the kind of feelings that are most important for the tasks that are central in our particular culture. Now, importantly, also, we trust people better when they have the kind of happiness that our culture values. So that's true for the people we entrust with leadership positions. They have the kind of happiness that we value in the culture, excited or calm, because that kind of happiness serves the tasks that we find important, either being influential or in control or being flexible. But it also goes beyond trust, beyond the leaderships. We tend to put more trust in and also, for example, share more money with team members who have culturally valued kind of happiness. So if I value excited happiness, then I trust a team member who is elated more than a calm team member, and the other way around. So it's possible that I'm not aware I favor the person with the matching emotions, but I still do. Okay, that's what I wanted to say about trust and leadership. I want to go to another situation, which is conflict. Emotions in conflict. Problems occur in every organization, and it's good to understand the emotions around conflict. And I want to start here by showing you some examples of two. I'm showing you two interviews from employees telling us about a situation in the workplace where they felt offended by another person because that other person overstepped their boundaries. And the first person, unfortunately, I don't have the animation, but the first person is a 38-year-old US man. He was a supervisor in an electrical department. It was back when I lived in North Carolina. We interviewed all kinds of people there. And he gets called in for a problem in some public building. And then he meets and encounters, runs into a security guard who asked him to justify what he's doing there, and also asked him for his qualification. And Andrew is really upset, and he says, "I'm very angry that you would question my ability." And he explains to us that he's particularly angry because this guard is a subordinate to him. He's lower than him. And what is it this guard's business to ask him for his qualification? And he thinks that maybe the guard asked him because the guard was trying to get ahead. So he tells the guard, "I know what I'm talking about. You're completely off base. And you're overstepping your bounds. And then actually soon after that, he withdraws from the conversation. He says about that, I'll get very hot, but then I'll get over it. But then his colleague, Robert, who's next to him, takes over and starts yelling at the guard. And eventually, Andrew tells us that he reports the guard and that the guard ends up being fired from the job. Now, compare this situation, this interview, to an interview with a Japanese man, Masao, 50 years old. He's working at a company and he's part of the organizing committee of a summit at work, and he is personally put in charge of inviting the external members. And at a committee meeting, one of the other members says, criticizes him. He says, you haven't done enough of the inviting. And then it also turns out that this colleague has actually taken Masao's job already and has started calling some external guests himself. And Masao is very offended and annoyed. He tells us that, but he never acts on his feelings. So he actually tries to understand the perspective of his fellow committee members. He says, well, he's the kind of person who's eager to do anything for the organization. And he's second guessing himself. He says, well, maybe this guy is right. And maybe I was a little unreliable. Maybe I was procrastinating a bit because I don't really like to call these people. And so he says, well, maybe this colleague solved the problem himself rather than asking me. So these are two conflict situations in which workers are angry and annoyed. Yet what mattered in these situations and what the emotions looked like and felt like was very different. And you might think of all the different ways in which these particular situations were different, and you may be true, but we actually did 50 interviews with American respondents and 50 interviews with Japanese respondents. They all told us about some conflict, and we pretty much found the same pattern. We found that Americans told us that it was the fault of the other person, that the other person was wrong. They also vilified the other person in the sense of that the other person did it for their own gain, or for, there were some improper motives. They distanced themselves. They were inclined to aggression. They blamed the other and they asserted themselves. If you compare that with the dominant or the prevalent Japanese responses, they were very different. So they justified or tried to understand the other person. They explained themselves to the other person, or at least tried to see also what their contribution to the situation was. Many of them said they didn't do anything and they just simply didn't want the situation. And you can also see that in this conflict situation, more Japanese explained them or did nothing than that they were inclined to aggression or asserted themselves. So it was a completely different pattern. So when there are problems in a team you coached, difference in emotions may compound them. You need to be aware that there are these differences and be attuned to them. Don't listen exclusively to the loudest emotions. Try to read the subtle ones too, and be assertive. Be aware that what is assertive in some cultures is considered immature in others. I want to very briefly say something about emotions and burnouts, and return to the Japanese response or lack thereof in conflict situation. As you remember, the majority of Japanese in our study reported doing nothing in a conflict situation. So aren't Japanese in this study bottling up their emotions? And how bad is this for their well-being and their health? Now, many organizations now recognize that we need to create safe spaces for emotions of the team members, both for positive emotions and for negative emotions. And the idea is that the well-being and vitality of team members depends on being able to express their authentic emotions. But do we know that? Or do we only know it for weird cultures? We find in research that in many cultures, mostly non-weird cultures, people are used to tailoring their emotions to the social expectations of the moment, and that they don't experience this as alienating or as inauthentic. It also means that while it's very natural for some people to express their bad mood or vent their frustration in a safe space, it feels quite unnatural for others to yield to their feelings. So while it's important to create safe spaces, not every team member will feel the need to express their emotions. And for some, this exercise of knowing what you feel may be quite unnatural. They will instead be focused on others or on how the team is doing rather than on what they themselves are feeling. So you can certainly give a space to how people experience the organization and the interaction, but no one size fits all. So what does all of this mean for coaching multicultural teams? How can we bridge our differences in emotions and even make them productive? I want to say first that there is no magic shortcut. Understanding emotions take time, and understanding them across cultural boundaries, if possible, takes even more time. But I would say it's time well spent. Time avoiding feelings of misunderstanding, time for including and incentivizing employees, time for making a team work, time perhaps for creating an organization where all can be productive and feel heard. There is no magic tool, but I can offer you a tool to scaffold the process, one that tells you about the kinds of differences that you may encounter and inspires you to second guess yourself and to ask questions, to unpack emotions or emotional episodes. But I have a first ground rule, which is that your own emotions are culture too. And I came to this ground rule the hard way, as you understood. Never assume you know what somebody else is feeling and what this means. Never project your own feelings. They may not be what the other person is feeling at all. Now, what can we do to unpack an emotion? I have some questions that you can ask. And the first one is, what is the emotion and what does it mean? Don't always be sure that you know what someone is feeling. I gave you the example of happiness. It's not because somebody doesn't look exuberant that they're not happy. One reason may be that happy to them and in their culture means something different. It could be the calm happy that they value rather than the exuberant happy. A second question that can help you unpack the emotions is, how and why did what happened matter? Think about Masao and Andrew. Both were angry and annoyed, but to Andrew it mattered because he felt disrespected. Or another way of saying it, the guard failed to give him the dignity that he felt he deserved. To Masao, it seemed to matter because it threatened harmonious relationships in the team. He didn't want to give offense, and he didn't want to fall short of the expectations. That was why it mattered to him. A third question that you can ask is, what would be a good or normal emotional expression? Ask yourself what you think. Is it good or bad to assert your anger, such as Andrew did? Is it good or bad to try to keep harmony, as Masao did? The short answer to this question really is, it depends on what it means in your culture. But you can ask the people, your clients. You can also ask with indirect questions. what did or what would others think of you when they knew that you were behaving this way? Or what would they think if you hadn't acted the way you did? The final, sorry, good question. A final question that you can ask is this person trying to change how they're feeling or expressing? And is this good or bad for them? And it's good to know that emotion regulation happens all the time, right? In everyday life, people are constantly regulating their emotions. You can think, perhaps I should think about this differently, or perhaps my client has a point. When you make such considerations, your emotions are likely to change. People are also constantly suppressing or amplifying the expression of their emotions. I don't want to be angry at my boss. I do want to show my gratitude to my colleague. These are all examples of regulation. Now, find out what your clients would like to feel. What are the perceived norms and what are the perceived norms at the workplace? How much of a burden is it to them to have to obey to these norms? Do they feel alienated? Learning what is bothersome and alienating is important, but do not assume that just because there is emotion regulation, it's alienating. It can be just, people can regulate their emotions without being bothered by it at all. Okay, I wanted to leave it at this, and thank you. Sorry for the tech problems. Thank you for listening, and I hope to get many questions, and there's also more to be read in my book.
Thank you so much. Thank you. There are some comments in the chat here. So I'm just going to walk through them a little bit. And if anybody has any other questions, please drop them into the chat. We have got some time to go through them. So Yaz was asking, when you were going through the differences between, on the graph, the difference between South Korea. So she's saying, I'd be interested to know why South Korea is higher. So I think you described it as an exception. Do you have any insight you can share with Yaz on that?
I don't know. I also don't know that it came out in this study, but I don't know that there is a consistent difference. I don't know that. I haven't heard anybody from South Korea saying anything meaningful either. No, I don't know that.
Yeah, because Yaz says she's just moved back from living there.
Okay.
Annalise said, I think there's also an element of how the country's culture influences organizational culture and how
Sure.
can be experienced in organizations having a culture not fully reflecting the country's culture and the impact this then has on an employee's emotions. So an organization that's based in the States and has a strong American influence on the culture, how does that influence the UK office culture and the impact on emotions and experiences? Is there anything you'd like to share there?
Yeah, I think as a psychologist, I mean, this is not going to be satisfying, but as a psychologist, psychology doesn't obey to national borders, of course. Psychology doesn't care. So I would say, country is just one way of organizing the data. But of course, within countries, there are huge differences. There are huge differences between companies. There are huge differences between socioeconomic class. Having said that, the organizational literature, we just wrote a chapter for a book on emotional regulation in the workplace. Of course, companies are often reflecting cultures as well, like how a company handles feedback or handles leadership. I mean, we see national differences in it. We see also within nation differences in it. So I would say a company is as much as a culture as a country. It's just not how we as psychologists have organized the data. But it's certainly true that the larger culture, the environment, be it a national culture or an organizational culture, has an impact on the emotions of the workers.
Thank you.
For example, I felt it was very different to work in American organizations than in Dutch or now in Belgian organizations. And I do think that the national culture comes through a little bit. But, you know, that said, there are, of course, immense differences between organizations as well.
And Carrie said, thank you for your wonderful presentation. Your book is groundbreaking and I really enjoyed it. And her question is, I hear in your research and work are taking power out of emotions and making them more ordinary. Certainly in US culture, we passionately believe that an emotion belongs to me, it lives in me. I think that gives emotions too much prominence, like they can control us. Can you speak more to this?
Yeah. So it's a hard question in a way. Yeah, I think, you know, the weird perspective of emotions is that emotions are natural forces and that we can't control them, right? But the truth about emotions is that they're ways of seeing the world. When I say an emotion is, you know, my assessment that something is inconsistent with my values or norms, I'm really creating the meaning of an event. So, you know, when, just an example, I'm angry because this guy is completely unreasonable and has no right to treat me this way. But of course, the moment I say, what is my right anyway? You know, I'm not, individual rights are not that important. This guy behaves in a certain way. Oh, let me try to understand what this guy wants. That emotion is gone. So it's very much, the emotions we have is about creating meaning about the world. Now, that meaning is created between us. And that's the title of my book. You can create that meaning when, to the extent that others agree with you and allow you to create that meaning. When I'm really angry and somebody says, she's hysterical, but the power of my anger is gone. The social power of my anger is gone. And so in cultures and in organizations, and also positionally, we grant certain people the power of interpreting the world in a certain way. I mean, that's power and position I'm talking about, but even what we think is conceivable, like, can I, as an individual, say that I'm entitled to something? I mean, that is very time and place bound. It's, you know, if I were a woman in the 19th century, I wouldn't be entitled to anything. If I am a person in many, except for the big boss and the person with the most power, I wouldn't be entitled to my own rights. I just behave according to norms. And I wouldn't even say that. I'm now saying it as if it's, you know, as if we're progressively getting more rights and there is an emancipation story to be told. But there is also another story to be told, which is that, you know, you can make organizations and societies work in different ways. You can make them work in ways where you just distribute whatever the roles, what everybody does, and then people stick to their roles. Or you can constantly negotiate roles and see how you're doing it and have this open-ended kind of interactions. And both can work. I wouldn't say one is necessarily working in one way and the other, and working better than the other, but both are related to a different way of experiencing emotion. I mean, when I am concerned about roles, I'm concerned about meeting my role obligations. When I'm concerned about rights, I'm concerned about other people giving me the rights that I deserve. So I think that emotions are very much meaning making, and in that sense are not at all this natural response that you cannot do anything about. There's some cultures, and I believe that the question originates from that. In my book, I make a distinction between a mind model and an hours model. So in some cultures, the mental aspects and the part of the emotion that is inside me are heavily emphasized, and that's, you know, mostly in weird cultures. That's what we do. We think that emotions are unique, belong to us, and are natural and have to speak. In many other cultures, there is more emphasis on what's going on between people, and I call that ours emotion, in the sense that emotions are seen there as relational, as negotiating roles, as going on between people. I know that emotions are, of course, to some extent both. I mean, everybody who has an emotion universally feels something, and for everybody, an emotion is also going on between people. But as a culture, we emphasize one part of the emotion more than the other. And so this idea of emotions is very natural. You can't fight with it. I've also talked to teachers who say, but you know, how can we not have kids express their whatever it is? You know, how could there be a culture where that can't be good for kids? Well, the truth is that, you know, we tell kids what's good and what's not good in the domain of emotions, for the most part.
I've got one final question from Sally, which is, so how do non-weird cultures manage negative emotions?
How do I what? Sorry, I didn't hear.
How do non-weird cultures manage negative emotions?
Negative emotions is a big category. So actually, there are many cultures in which shame, for example, has a bigger role than it has in the Western cultures that I know. So it's not, I think, about non-weird emotions, but it's probably about anger or maybe even sadness. And anger often has a different role, not always. And I also don't want to give the impression that the world consists of weird and non-weird cultures. The weird label is really to make us realize that what we're talking about, what our knowledge comes from, is a very small, narrow slice of the population, of the world population. So that we should be really careful to infer from that knowledge how people in general in the world work. Some of the things that people well, for example, the Japanese example that I gave you, the Masao example, is something that happens a lot. You just look at what is required from me, and you start thinking about taking other perspectives on the world or on what happens. You can feel annoyed and then think, but you know, why would the other person do that? Would they have a reason to? Or it's not, maybe it wasn't so important. I mean, people, there is suppression. Of course, there can be suppression. But there are also, again, there are many ways of interpreting what you encounter. And so negative emotions are not a fact of nature, but negative emotions is something that you yield to, elaborate, lean into, or to the contrary, think that, you know, that it's not reasonable, that you should find the other side, that you should be calm, that you should focus on the other person's perspective, that you should focus on the harmony of the situation. Now that, you know, don't get me wrong. I mean, there are many honor cultures where relativizing anger is not a thing, because you get angry when your honor is violated, and it's the only way to respond. So I certainly don't want us to get away from this, thinking that everybody except for in the West regulates their anger or takes a different perspective. There are many different ways, but what I would like you to get away with is to see emotions as meaning making, and as meaning making related to what is important to you and the culture. And that first of all, that a single situation can be important in many different ways, depending on what is important to you and your culture. Is it important to get what you're entitled to, or is it more important to meet your role expectations, or more important to keep the harmony in the situation? And the other thing is that what you can do with initial feelings, that, as I said, we're constantly regulating. It's not like we're succumb to this force of nature. It's we're accepting it, we're yielding to it, we're elaborating on it, we're leaning into it. That's what makes us angry. And so the minute you start looking at different angles or giving different interpretations, I mean, situations are always susceptible to many different interpretation, even in a single culture. So you can lean into another side of it, of the meaning.
Thank you so much. So much to think about. Highly recommend your book. So if this has kind of got you interested and this comes up with clients that you work with, having sensitivity to different cultural differences, as well as developing our understanding of what emotions mean, how they might be experienced without generalizing, but having some background knowledge, I think, can be really helpful as coaches. Thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciate it. I'm going to stop the recording now. I'll also need to end the call so that we can get the recording processed, and we look forward to seeing those of you that are going to be joining us for Rebecca's session next shortly. Thank you so much, Batja, and everybody that's here today. Thank you.